Keto and Krime, Keto and Krime. We uncover the grime on Keto and Krime. Keto and Krime, Keto and Krime. Now is the time for Keto and Krime.
Hey everyone, Tracy here from Keto and Krime. Thank you so much to every single one of my patrons and channel members. You make this possible. And you're one of the reasons I do this. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if I haven't said it before, thank you. I'll sing it. Thank you. Thank you for hanging in there with me and letting me geek out, not making fun of me like a lot of other people do, because I like weird stuff about crime and dark history. Thanks everyone. Hey everyone, welcome back to Keto and Krime. Today we've got part 2 of John Wayne Gacy. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you. Couldn't do it without you. Special shout out to my channel members and my patrons. I really appreciate everyone and I really enjoy doing this. So I hope you enjoy it too. And with that being said, let's dive into part 2 of John Wayne Gacy. In part 1, we went through John Wayne Gacy's childhood. He suffered a lot of trauma, a lot of abuse at the hands of his father. Kind of overcompensated for that by being an overachiever in civic activities like politics and, the JCs. Eventually had some success when he married into a good family. He earned his way into management with a shoe store, met a young woman by the name of Marilyn. They married. Her father owned a Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise, 3 of them actually in Waterloo, Iowa. He moved John Wayne there. They had a house. They had 2 children. He had what was equivalent to a 6-figure job, and then he started abusing young boys and ended up being sentenced to 10 years in prison. His wife divorced him, and he lost custody of his young children. And that's where we pick up with him serving his 10-year sentence in Anamosa State Penitentiary. He was a model prisoner. If you look at any of his records from that time period, he was always accommodating, very nice, well-liked by both staff and other prisoners. I guess this is before, what would happen to an abuser if they were put into general population. Maybe they didn't release what, he had done to general population, but he was well-liked. He actually received a commission to be a cook in the prison. As I talked about in my 2 videos on Alcatraz, working, I'll link those up there. Working is a privilege, especially during long sentences, so you don't have to sit in your cell and become a vegetable. So he became a cook and eventually rose to the position of head cook in the prison commissary and kitchen. He also undertook several political aspirations within the prison, believe it or not. He joined the inmate JC chapter, increased its membership from 50 to 650 men, petitioned the warden and the state prison system to increase prisoners' pay, daily pay, and so he got all of his, mess hall people a raise, essentially. And even helped improve other daily conditions for prisoners. And by 1969, having been there just a year, he oversaw the installation of a miniature golf course in the prison rec yard. What was he doing? Imagine how much he could have actually gotten done in politics if he had taken some of that good energy and turned it for the people instead of becoming creepy clown killer. What could he have done? It's just amazing to me. He came up for his first chance at parole 1 year after being incarcerated in actually mid-1969, and was denied. He began to undertake more education, helped finish up kind of what he left undone in high school. Even though he did receive a GED, he went ahead and undertook high school courses while in prison to go ahead and get an official diploma instead of a GED. And he achieved this in 1969, hoping it would give him a better chance at his next parole hearing in 1970. More tragedy would happen, though, December 25th, 1969, when Gacy's father died of cirrhosis of the liver from years of abusing alcohol. And when they told John, he supposedly collapsed to the floor sobbing, and he requested supervised compassionate leave to attend his father's funeral, which was denied. However, he did achieve probation and parole on June 18th, 1970, in his second parole hearing, and was allowed to return to Chicago, having served only 18 months of a 10-year sentence. The conditions of his parole was that he had to go back to Chicago to live with his mother, and that he must be in every evening by 10 p.m. After being released, he did return, moved in with his mother, and his friend Clarence Lane, who is the one that picked him up from prison upon his release, he told him that he was innocent, that all these charges were trumped up against him, and that he would never go back to jail, and that he intended to reestablish himself in Waterloo. However, his father said he was a bit delusional because he was having to remain in Chicago for an unprecedented amount of years. He arrived back at his mom's house on June 19th and immediately obtained a job as a short order cook in a local diner. However, his pattern of abusing young boys remained intact. February 12, 1971, after luring an unnamed teenage boy into his car at the local Chicago Greyhound bus terminal, he drove him to his home when his mother was at home and attempted to force the boy into a sexual act. Those charges were dismissed because the young boy did not show up for the hearing. Later that same year, June 22nd, Gacy was arrested and charged with aggravated sexual battery and reckless conduct. Because he had lured another minor into his car by use of a fake sheriff's badge. And basically these charges were dropped because the boy initially had tried to blackmail Gacy into paying him off. And when that came out, they assumed he must have been lying, so those charges were dropped. And somehow none of this got from Illinois to Iowa to the Board of Paroles. And so his 1 year of parole for assaulting children. I don't understand what was going on in the 70s. But again, that's how Dahmer got away with a lot of his stuff. So his parole actually ended, as did the terms of his parole. So he no longer had to live with his mother. He no longer had to be in by 10 p.m. And so by October of 1971, that ended because they didn't hear about any of these new charges, and his records were sealed. So Gacy is free and clear now, and I don't think there was anything like a sex registry, sex offender registry at the time, so I seriously doubt there was any remnants of his past crimes that were around. And just a few months later, almost in 1972, with some financial assistance from his mom, who helped provide a down payment and co-signed with him, Gacy was able to buy a ranch house in Norwich, Illinois. It's an unincorporated area of Cook County, the same county in which Chicago resides. And the address was 8213 West Somerdale Avenue. And this address would go down as a house of horrors because this is where he committed all of his assaults, all of his murders, until his arrest in 1978, just 6 years after buying it. He became very active in the local community. He helped his neighbors. He shoveled snow. He walked elderly people to the store. He used his tools. He was actually very talented with construction tools, and he would fix little things around his neighbors' homes. And he even became quite a party host. He would host annual summer parties, which would be themed, and these events were always well attended by his neighbors and could grow up to about 400 people, including many, many Democratic politicians. His mom also moved in with him as she was becoming unable to care for herself. And Gacy met another woman. He met young Carol Hoff, who he had dated in high school. They were married in July of 1972. And she had 2 daughters from her previous marriage. They moved into the house on Summerdale with Gacy and his mom. But his mom would move out into assisted living shortly after the wedding. Their marriage was rocky, to say the least. Sex, intimacy between them was few and far between. He was quite aloof. They attempted counseling, didn't work. And finally, in 1975, on Mother's Day, Gacy confessed to her that he was bisexual. And he said that he didn't think he could ever have sex with her again because he was more strongly attracted to men. And with that being said, he began spending more and more time away from home. Yet Carol stayed. I don't understand. Maybe she, this was the 70s. It wasn't as easy, I think, for early 70s. I guess not as easy for a young, single mother to make it. So maybe she felt she had to. But she stayed, and she actually observed Gacy bringing young boys home and staying out with them in the garage. She also found a lot of gay porn, men's wallets, and identification that had been accidentally left at the house and in the garage. She did confront him a time or two with all of this, and he became angry with her and told her it was none of her business. In October of 1975, they had a very heated argument about her, according to him, her inability to balance a checkbook correctly, and Carol asked him for a divorce, and he agreed, and they actually divorced, and by mutual consent, she continued to live in the house until 1976 with her 2 daughters, until, with Gacy's help, they moved out into their own apartment. And they were granted a divorce in March of 1976 by virtue of Gacy's infidelity, though it did not state infidelity with who, but I think we all know. Shortly before the divorce, though, he had started his own contracting business. As I said, he was very talented when it came to handyman sort of things, and he had started his own business known as Painting, Decorating, and Maintenance, PDM Contractors. And he was working evenings with on his improvement and construction contracts, and then working as a short order cook during the day. A lot of the reason he was not home a lot, and of course, the affairs played into that as well. But by the time of the divorce, PDM was doing quite well, and was up to about $100,000 in annual revenue by the time his divorce was finalized. By 1978, at the time of his arrest, it was valued at well over $200,000, which would be a couple million, several million today. And now that his wife and stepdaughters were gone, he had unabashed freedom to do whatever he wanted to, and this is where things start to turn really dark. He joined another public service organization similar to the JCs called the Moose Club. I think he was banned from the JCs by this point, but it sounds like with everything going on in Waterloo, they didn't really care about shadiness. But through that Moose Club, he became aware of a Jolly Joker Clown Club that's just laughable, that performed in costume for fundraising events, parades, and at the local children's hospital. And he joined that troupe of Jolly Clowns and became Pogo the Clown. I think that is the image we all know about John Wayne Gacy, and Patches the Clown. He devised his own makeup and costumes. Pogo was the happy clown, and Patches was more of a sad clown. So you can kind of see the yin and yang of Gacy starting to form here. He never accepted any money for his performances and would do it on a volunteer basis, and those that actually observed his performances said that he regressed to being a child during those performances. I mean, it wasn't just Gacy as a clown. It was Gacy is now a clown. Gacy is a child and a clown. They said it was very trippy, and he would often remain in costume after his performances and interact with the people there. And this is how, of course, we know him today. At work, at his contracting business, of course, he staffed it just like he did the KFC restaurants with lots of young boys, teens and young men in their early 20s. And he would, just like he had with his KFC workers, he would proposition them for more. And would trade sexual acts for lending them vehicles, loaning them money, or promoting them to foremen and things like that. He also kind of threatened them, saying that he owned guns and he would know how to get rid of a body if he had to. He was accused of sexual assault several times, including a forced assault in Florida with a young employee in a hotel room that they shared while going to a job in Florida. And this employee, after a return to Chicago, actually ambushed Gacy outside his home and beat him senseless. Carol, who happened to be there at the time, witnessed this, and Gacy told her that the employee was mad because he had not paid him for very crappy painting services. So, in May of 1975, Gacy hired a young 15-year-old by the name of Anthony Antitucci and invited him home 2 months after his employment started to drink some wine, watch a stag film, and then they ended up wrestling, in which Gacy cuffed Anthony's hands behind his back. Anthony managed to get one hand free because the cuff was loose, and basically, because he was a wrestler, he was able to wrestle Gacy to the floor and put the cuffs on him. And Gacy let him go. There was no other violence. Gacy was impressed that he was able to get out of the cuffs and put the cuffs on him. That was the last thing he did before he and Carol officially split, and she had moved out. But shortly after she moved out, he picked up 18-year-old David Krime as a hitchhiker and offered him a job with PDM, and they began to work on a project that same evening. August 21st, Krime actually moved into the house with Gacy. They celebrated his 19th birthday with drinks and stag films, and Gacy dressed up as Pogo, which I don't know what was going on in that house. But he basically tricked Krime into putting on the handcuffs and on the front of his body rather than behind, and he would swing Krime around by holding the handcuffs at length, and then said he intended to have his way with him. Krime kicked Gacy in the face and managed to free himself of the handcuffs. But yet the young boy did not move out of the house. He continued to stay at the house. I can only assume because he had nowhere else to go, but dang. About a month later, Gacy went into Krime's bedroom and said he intended to assault him, saying, "You really don't know who I am. Maybe it would just be good for you if you give me what I want." Krime, of course, resisted again. Straddling Gacy, beat him down, and then left the bedroom, stating, "You ain't no fun." And then he finally moved out in October, 2 months after this incident, and then quit PDM. But he did still periodically work for Gacy during the following year, so I can't even fathom. I don't understand. But he was one of the main people that spoke about Gacy after his arrest. Gacy continued, even with all these shenanigans, continued to be very highly placed with the Democratic Party. He had never stopped working for them. He became a block captain in his community. He organized Chicago's Polish Constitutional Day Parade. He actually met with then First Lady Rosalynn Carter in 1978, just before his arrest, just a couple of months later. And even today, the United States Secret Service said they had no idea why they even allowed that meeting to take place, being that Gacy had a criminal record. Because in a photo with the First Lady, which I will put here, is shown wearing an S pen, which gives a person special clearance. Come on, what are you doing? And what Gacy is most well known for is the murder of 33 young men and boys, 26 of them buried in the crawl space of his house. We know that these murders started somewhere around 1972 and ended in 1978, but he had a similar MO for all of them. He would meet a young man, ply them with drink, drugs, gain their trust. He would do his magic show, sometimes dressed as Pogo, sometimes as Patches, sometimes just as John Wayne Gacy. He would then produce a pair of handcuffs and put the handcuffs on his victims, telling them it was part of the magic show. And then he would often handcuff them together. They would do some magic, and then he would unattach himself, leaving his victims handcuffed by when he would put the other one on it. And then once the victim began to struggle, he would tell them the trick is you have to get yourself free, which most of them, of course, didn't. He would then assault and torture them through various methods, and then he would kill them by placing a tourniquet around their neck and tightening it progressively with a hammer handle, telling them this was a rope trick and the last trick, all while doing very weird things to them, such as burning reins into their neck, sitting on them as if they were a horse, forcing them to perform fellatio on him, and basically just absolutely having his way with them until choking them with a tourniquet. He would then bury them under his bed for 24 hours and then move most of them to the crawl space of the house, Summerdale house, where he would pour quicklime to make them decompose faster. A couple of them he did embalm in his garage. But that was basically his MO. And I'm going to go over a few of the more notable events. But if I went over all 33, just like Dahmer, we would be here all day. So I'm going to keep it to the more well-known ones. We'll start with what we know to be his, or what we think is his very first murder. It occurred January 3rd, 1972. A young man by the name of Timothy McCoy. He was traveling from Michigan to Omaha, Nebraska, and was on a layover at the Chicago area Greyhound bus station. He lured him out with promise of a sightseeing tour of Chicago, and then said he could spend the night. He would return him to his bus the next day. However, McCoy awoke with, and according to Gacy, decided to go make breakfast for the two of them. So he started some eggs and got some unsliced bacon, and then walked to Gacy's room to wake him up. He still had the knife in his hand, according to Gacy, from making the breakfast. But when Gacy saw him, he thought he was being threatened. He jumped up, he attacked him, they struggled, and he ended up stabbing the young boy to death and burying him in his crawl space. But what makes this such a distinctive time is that after Gacy knew that McCoy was dead, he listened to the gurgles as he died, choking on his own blood, literally, and he experienced, according to him, a mind-numbing orgasm, and then realized at that point that death was the ultimate thrill, and that's why he continued to do what he did in kind of a sadomasochistic rampage. According to Gacy, who's very talkative up until his execution, said that his second murder happened around January of 1974. He does not know the victim's name, but that Gacy strangled him with the tourniquet and then hung his body in his closet for several days before burying him in the crawl space. He said that to keep the bodily fluids from leaking out all over his floor, he would stuff rags, underwear, whatever, into the victim's mouths and orifices to keep that stuff from draining. Because you got to keep it clean. The third murder, it happened July 31, 1975. It was to a young Yugoslavian immigrant by the name of John Wayne Gacy. He had been an employee of PDM with whom Gacy had not paid for over 2 weeks, and the boy was trying to collect his pay from Gacy. Even his father had joined in, calling Gacy, trying to get the boy's pay, and according to people, eyewitnesses and other stuff, said that, and in Gacy's own confession, he encountered 𝐤𝐚𝐻𝐿𝐽 exiting his car at the corner of West Lawrence Avenue in Chicago and waved him down. He said that hey, let's go over to my house, let's discuss your pay, let's get you paid. And so he invited him over to his house. And while there, he gave him alcohol, ended up handcuffing him, and then basically strangled him with the tourniquet and stowed the body in the garage, embalming him there. He also lied to the boy's father, who called several times over several days to investigate, try to find out if Gacy had seen his son. Gacy lied. The young boy's father knew something was up, and he begged the police to investigate Gacy, but unfortunately they never did. He was block captain. He was a politician. He was well known. The records from Iowa were sealed. They had no idea. So, but because of, I don't know, just, these things just get to me so much. How much of these murders could have been prevented if the police had just done their job? You know, I know that police aren't superhuman. I have a great respect for law enforcement. I have law enforcement in my family. But when I read things like this, it just gets to me. I can't understand it. You know, ugh. Anyway, so this young boy was buried underneath his garage, which could have been prevented if somebody had bothered to investigate. And then from there, we go into what Gacy himself called the cruising years, where he would cruise the streets, Greyhound bus terminal, clubs, looking for victims. And it was through these years that he got the other 30 victims that he killed in much the same manner, luring them home, drugs, alcohol, handcuffs, pogo, strangling them. I'm going to name a few of the victims that were killed during this time period. Daryl Sampson, Michael Bonney, James Hackinson, Kenneth Parker and Michael Marino, Francis Alexander, Gregory 𝐤𝐚𝐲𝐧, John 𝐧𝐭, whose car Gacy used for a little while until he was questioned when he had accused another young boy by the name of Rossi of siphoning gas, and they actually questioned Gacy as to how he had possession of this missing youth's car, and he simply said that he had sold it to him and produced a bill of sale, even though it was not notarized. There was nothing official about it. It was basically scribbled on a piece of paper, but yet they bought it. So the rampage continued, 1976, 1977, until December 11th, 1978, when Gacy, visiting Nissan Pharmacy in Des Plaines, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. It is where the very first corporate McDonald's was built. I've actually seen that. It's pretty cool. But he was there in this pharmacy discussing with the pharmacy owner a potential remodeling job. And there he overheard a part-time employee of the pharmacy by the name of Robert Peast talking about wanting to get another job because his wages at the pharmacy were just not enough. And Gacy approached him after meeting with the pharmacy owner and said that he does hire people for his contractors, for his contracting company at a wage of $5 per hour, which is double the $2.50 per hour the youth was currently making at the pharmacy. So, yeah, he was definitely interested and told Gacy he would meet him after he got off. Peace's mother pulled up to the pharmacy to drive her son home so they could celebrate his birthday. And Peace simply asked his mother to wait because a contractor wants to talk to me about a job. He left the store at 9 p.m. telling her he would return home shortly. But of course, he never did. According to forensics, he was murdered shortly after 10 p.m. at Gacy's home, and he had, typical MO, drinks, handcuffs, strangled. According to Gacy, he and Peace engaged in a conversation asking what he would or would not do for enough money, and that's how he kind of got him into it. And Gacy admitted to actually taking a phone call from a business acquaintance as Peace lay suffocating on his floor. Yeah, real nice guy. But this victim had a tenacious mother. She filed a missing persons report with Des Plaines Police. Torf, who was the owner of the pharmacy, named Gacy as the contractor that Peace had been talking to. And that's who he was probably talking to about the job. And Des Plaines Lieutenant Detective Joseph Konzenzak knew Peace because his son had attended high school with him, so now it's personal. He did choose to go ahead and investigate Gacy. I don't see why there was even a question that he should be investigated. He was the last person that Peace said he was going to talk to. After interviewing Peace's mother on December 12th, he determined that Peace had probably not run away from home, so he actually did a background check on Gacy, seeing an outstanding battery charge against him and from Chicago, and the fact that he had been convicted in Iowa of the sodomy of a 15-year-old boy. So ding, ding, ding. He did the one thing that no other police officer in the whole history of the saga bothered to do. So Konzenzak and 2 other Des Plaines officers visited Gacy at his home on December 13th. Gacy indicated that he had seen both Peace and another young boy working at the pharmacy, and had spoken to them briefly about how he hired young men, but had not seen him since. But he said he had never, under any circumstances, offered Peace a job. He had simply told him that he does sometimes hire young people, but why would you say that if you weren't going to offer him a job? So they asked Gacy to come down to the station to give a statement, and he promised to come down to the station later that evening, as his uncle had died and he had to go to the wake. They were kind of insistent, asking him, when are you going to be at the station to make this statement? And he said, you guys are rude. Don't you have any respect for the dead? At 3:20 a.m., Gacy arrived at the police station covered in mud, claiming he had been involved in a car accident, although they found no record of such a car accident. And then went home and said he would return later that day, which he did, and again denied any involvement in Peace's disappearance, and repeated he had not offered him a job. They asked him why he had left the store and then come back and talked to the boys, and he said he didn't talk to the boys the second time around. He only went back to the store because Torf, the pharmacist, had called him and told him that he had left his appointment book, which Torf later said was not true. He never called Gacy. And that Gacy did prepare a written statement of all his movements to try to prove himself innocent. The Des Plaines police really felt this might have been a kidnapping and that Gacy might be actually holding Peace prisoner. So they got a search warrant to search Gacy's house on December 13th. Upon searching the house, they found a lot of weird stuff. They found a small pistol. They found syringes and hypodermic needles. They found gay porn, books on being a pedo. They found weird books with names like Pretty Boys Must Die. They found several regular and gay pornographic films. They found a lot of weird drugs such as amyl nitrate, Valium, atropine. They found several driver's licenses of other people in one of the bedrooms. They found clothes that were much too small to fit Gacy. And they also found a Maine West High School class ring and some nylon rope. And you're asking, why didn't they arrest Gacy at that time? I don't know. Maybe they were looking for the smoking gun. So they decided to set up surveillance of Gacy and his home. So they confiscated Gacy's car and some of his work vehicles. They set up a 2-man surveillance, so there was always somebody trailing him. And they actually dug deeper into disappearances of other young men around Chicagoland, as well as talking to the mother of John Allen Sick, who remember the car? Well, that class ring was his, and his mother confirmed it was his. They also talked to Jeffrey Ringgow, who had accused Gacy of battery in Chicago, and they underwent his recanted his testimony from that, even though Gacy was never convicted of that. And they also interviewed Carol, who told them some very disturbing things about her ex-husband. They also located David Cram, remember, the young man that lived with Gacy for several months, and interviewed him, saying that Gacy had given him several gifts, often saying they came from dead people. Gacy was quite inviting to his surveillors. He invited them in for drinks, for dinner, taunted them by running red lights and stuff like that. They also interviewed Rossi, remember the guy that was caught siphoning gas out of Sink's car? He said that Gacy had given him the car, and he took it because he needed money to move from California to California. They also searched Gacy's vehicles with cadaver-smelling dogs, and at least one of them indicated that a dead body had been in Gacy's own personal use Oldsmobile. Gacy was interviewed by detectives over and over again, and during one of the conversations, he said, "You know, clowns can get away with murder." So this just keeps going and going and going. This is just weird. By December 18th, the investigation was really beginning to wear on Gacy, and he actually went to a lawyer and was going to sue the city of Des Plaines for $750,000 for illegal surveillance. Meanwhile, some of the stuff they had taken from Gacy's apartment was traced to other young people that were either missing or missing and presumed dead. And the fact that some of it kind of proved that some of what Gacy was saying was wrong, they decided to initiate a second search warrant. Meanwhile, they were still interviewing Rossi and Cram, who said that at one point they had poured several bags of lime under the crawl space at Gacy's house, and they eventually, finally, with all of the insinuating circumstances, managed to get a search warrant for the house. And in that second search, they found many of Sink's possessions, a Motorola TV, which matched the serial numbers they had gotten from his mother, as well as receipts and things that tied Gacy to places where he said he had not been. Meanwhile, Cram is talking about the trenches that Gacy would often dig, saying it was for a sewer restoration project. And let's just say the heat was starting to come down on Gacy pretty good. By December 20th, he drove to his lawyer's office, a man by the name of Sam Amarante, and basically went in looking very disheveled. The lawyer poured him a drink, and during that during a conversation, there was a front page news story covering the disappearance of Robert Feast, and Gacy just mumbled out, "The boy's dead. He's in a river." And then he basically started to rambling confess to a lot of things. The lawyer immediately called police and got Gacy scheduled for a psychological evaluation, and basically this was all they needed to finally get the search warrant, and they decided to search every part of the house, including the crawl space, in which when they got there, they realized that Gacy had unplugged his sump pump, which caused the underlying area to be flooded with water. And they managed to, once they pumped that out, they started uncovering lots of remains. And Gacy was officially arrested the early morning hours of December 22nd, 1978. And from December 1978 to April 1979, they continued to search both Gacy's house and surrounding areas, finding a couple of bodies in the river. They only suspended the search for the Chicago blizzard of 79, but for the most part, they ended up finding the remains of 33 young men. Gacy was tried February 6, 1980, and was found guilty of 33 counts of first-degree murder. Gacy attempted to convince the courts that he had multiple personalities and paranoid schizophrenia, but psychologists never backed up. They said he was completely lucid, knew exactly what he was doing, and though he might be a sociopath or a psychopath, he was not delusional about what he was doing. He was incarcerated at Menard Correctional Center and eventually transferred to Statesville Correctional Center in Crest Hill, Illinois, to await his execution. He filed numerous appeals over the next 20 years, and eventually those did run out, and he was slated for execution on May 9th, 1994. Famously for his last meals, he wanted a bucket of KFC original recipe, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, fresh strawberries, and a Diet Coke. He underwent last rites by a Catholic priest before being lethally injected the night of May 9th, 1994. And thus ends the long sordid history of John Wayne Gacy. I'll be back really soon with another true crime video. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, Keto and Krime.